Reed Wiseman was strapped into his seat inside a capsule called Integrity, and he could not move his arms. Not because anything was wrong with his arms. Not because anything had broken inside the spacecraft. His arms were perfectly fine. But the force pressing down on his body was nearly 4 times the normal pull of gravity, and at that level, your arms stop being arms. They become dead weight. They become 2 40-pound objects attached to your shoulders that you cannot lift no matter how hard you try. So Reed Wiseman sat still, because sitting still was the only thing he could do, and he looked out the window, and what he saw was fire. Not flames. Not the kind of fire you see in a fireplace or a campfire or even a building burning down. This was something else entirely. This was plasma. This was air itself, compressed so violently by the speed of the capsule that it stopped being air and became something closer to the surface of a star. The temperature outside the window was nearly 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Half the temperature of the surface of the sun. And it was pressing against the glass from every direction, filling every inch of every window with a solid wall of orange and white light that pulsed and shifted and glowed like something alive. There was no sky behind it. There was no blue horizon waiting on the other side. There was no earth visible below, no stars above, no darkness anywhere. There was only the fire. Everywhere. Constant. Roaring silently on the other side of a few inches of glass. And Reed Wiseman could not call anyone. The radio had died 4 minutes earlier, at the exact moment the plasma formed around the capsule. This was not a malfunction. This was physics. The superheated ionized gas surrounding Integrity was electrically charged, and electrically charged gas blocks radio signals the same way a concrete wall blocks sound. Every frequency, every channel, every possible way of sending or receiving a message, all of it gone. Dead. Silent. Mission Control in Houston knew this was coming. The crew knew this was coming. Everyone had trained for it, simulated it, prepared for it in every way that preparation is possible. The blackout period was a known part of re-entry. It had happened on every crewed mission that had ever returned from space. Knowing it was coming did not make it feel any different. Because here is what the crew knew, sitting in silence with fire outside every window. They knew that the heat shield attached to the bottom of their capsule had a problem. Not a suspected problem. Not a theoretical problem. A confirmed, documented, physically observed and measured problem that engineers had spent 2.5 years studying. The same type of shield, on the previous Artemis mission, had cracked apart during re-entry. Pieces of it had blown off into space. More than 100 locations across the shield surface had been damaged. And the shield currently protecting Integrity was actually denser, less permeable, more prone to exactly that kind of failure than the one that had cracked before. The engineers had changed the re-entry trajectory to compensate. They had run more than 100 tests. They had built computer models and run worst-case simulations and brought in independent review teams. They had done everything that could be done without actually flying the mission. But all of that was finished now. All of that was behind them. The math had either been right or it had not, and there was absolutely no way to know which one it was until the 6 minutes were over. So the 4 of them sat in their seats, pressed into place by gravity they could not fight, looking out at fire they could not escape, waiting in silence they could not break. Victor Glover was sitting in the pilot's seat, and he was watching the windows. As a pilot, Glover had spent his career reading what aircraft were telling him through instruments, through vibrations, through sounds, through every tiny signal a machine sends when something is happening. He had hundreds of hours in high-performance jets. He had trained as a naval aviator, flown missions, and understood better than almost anyone what it felt like when a vehicle was behaving the way it was supposed to versus when something was going wrong. Right now, Integrity was shaking. Not violently. Not in a way that suggested catastrophic failure. But the vibration was constant and real, a deep shuddering that moved through the entire frame of the capsule as superheated air battered it from every side at speeds that human beings had no natural reference point for understanding. Nearly 25,000 miles per hour. 35 times the speed of sound. At that velocity, even the near vacuum of the upper atmosphere has enough molecules to create enormous physical force, and every one of those molecules was hitting the heat shield and transferring energy and heat into the material that was supposed to be protecting them. Glover could feel it in his seat. He could feel it in the handrests. He could feel it in his chest, a low-frequency vibration that was not quite sound and not quite movement but somewhere between the two. He watched the instruments in front of him, the ones that were still functioning, and he watched the windows, and he did what pilots do in moments where there is nothing left to control. He stayed calm. He breathed deliberately. He counted. The plasma outside his window was doing something that surprised him even though he had seen footage of it before, even though he had watched videos and studied photographs and sat through briefings that described it in detail. It was moving. The fire outside was not static. It churned and shifted and pulsed in patterns that looked almost organic, like something breathing, like the atmosphere itself was alive and angry and wrapping itself around them. Colors moved through it. The deep orange at the edges faded toward white at the center, and through it, occasionally, there were flickers of violet and blue at the very edges where the plasma met the cooler air beyond. It was, Glover thought, the most terrifying beautiful thing he had ever seen. Christina Koch was looking at the same windows and thinking something different. Koch had been in space before. She held the record for the longest continuous spaceflight by a woman, 328 days on the International Space Station. She had experienced re-entry before, the violent deceleration, the crushing gravity, the blackout period. She knew intellectually what this was supposed to feel like. But she had never come back from the moon. The velocity was different. Coming back from the International Space Station, the capsule re-enters at roughly 17,000 miles per hour. Coming back from the moon, the capsule hits the atmosphere at nearly 25,000 miles per hour. That difference of 8,000 miles per hour sounds like a number. What it feels like is not a number. What it feels like is the difference between something survivable and something that feels like it should not be survivable, and your body cannot tell the difference between those two things from the inside. The fire outside Koch's window was brighter than anything she had seen on her previous return from space. The plasma was thicker, more intense, more present. The vibration in the capsule was stronger. The force in her seat was heavier. Everything about this re-entry was more than what she remembered, and she had no way to know if the more was normal or if the more was the beginning of something going wrong. This is the thing nobody tells you about being an astronaut. The training prepares you for procedures. It prepares you for checklists and responses and technical problems with known solutions. It does not prepare you for sitting in a burning machine with nothing left to do, in silence, while the one component you cannot check and cannot fix and cannot control does either its job or it does not. The training does not prepare you for that, because there is no training for that. There is only the waiting. Koch waited. Outside her window, the fire continued its slow churning pulse, orange and white and impossibly bright, and she watched it the way you watch something that is simultaneously the most dangerous thing you have ever been near and the most extraordinary thing you have ever seen, because both of those things were true at exactly the same time. Jeremy Hansen was thinking about the heat shield. He could not stop thinking about it. He had sat in the engineering meetings. He had read the reports. He had asked questions that other people in the room had not asked, because he wanted to understand not just whether the plan would work but why it would work, what the physical mechanism was, what the actual chain of events looked like if everything went correctly. He understood the theory. Continuous high heat keeps the outer char layer permeable. Permeable outer layer lets the gases escape. Gases escape and there is no pressure buildup. No pressure buildup means no cracking, no fracturing, no pieces blowing off into the slipstream. He understood it completely. He believed it. He had chosen to be here, had chosen to climb into this capsule and fly to the moon and come back through the atmosphere on a heat shield that engineers had confirmed was flawed, because he believed that the people who had studied the problem had found the right solution. But understanding something and living it are different. Right now, on the other side of the capsule floor, separated from him by a few feet of spacecraft structure, the heat shield was either working or it was not. The char layer was either staying permeable or it was sealing. The gases were either venting safely outward or they were building up in pockets underneath the surface, pressure rising, cracks forming, the same failure mode that had damaged the Artemis 1 shield beginning to replicate itself on a capsule that now had 4 people inside it. And there was not one single thing Hansen could do about either outcome. He looked out the window. The plasma outside was a solid wall of orange-white light, shifting and churning with a slow rhythm that felt almost peaceful if you ignored what it was. He thought about what he had said when they set the distance record, floating 252,000 miles from Earth with the moon filling the window behind them. He had looked at the camera and told the world to make sure this record did not stand for long. He had meant it. He still meant it. He wanted to come home to mean it again in person. The capsule shook around him. The silence on the radio continued. The fire outside the windows did not change. He breathed. He counted the seconds. He waited. In Houston, in a room full of screens showing nothing, Flight Director Jeff Radigan sat in his chair and did not move. Every person in that room had a job. Every person in that room had trained for years to do that job under pressure, in emergencies, in situations where decisions made in seconds determined whether people lived or died. They were the best in the world at what they did. And right now, there was absolutely nothing for any of them to do. The screens were blank because the telemetry signal could not get through the plasma. The speakers were silent because the radio could not get through the plasma. For astronauts were falling through the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour inside a capsule with a known defective heat shield, and the most capable aerospace engineering team on the planet was sitting in a room in Texas doing nothing, because there was nothing to do. Radigan had described this moment before the mission in the flattest, most controlled language he could find. "We will just be thinking through things to keep ourselves calm as we wait for reacquisition of signal," he had said. Think about what that sentence is actually saying. Think about what it costs to say something that calm about something that terrifying. Think about the discipline it takes to sit in that chair, in that silence, in front of those blank screens, and not show the room what you are actually feeling. The room was quiet. The speakers played static. The clock on the wall showed the seconds passing. Every person in that room was doing the same calculation in their head, the same one they had been doing since the plasma formed, the same one they would keep doing until the signal came back. They were counting. They were waiting. They were hoping that the next voice they heard would be Reed Wiseman, calm and steady, telling them everything was fine. Because if the next voice they heard was not Reed Wiseman, there would be no voice at all. Inside Integrity, the fire outside the windows began to change. It happened slowly at first. The pure white center of the plasma started to darken, very slightly, toward a deeper orange. The churning pattern shifted. The intensity at the edges began to thin. If you were not watching carefully, you would not have noticed it at all. But all 4 of them were watching carefully, because there was nothing else to watch, and all 4 of them saw it at the same time. The plasma was thinning. The capsule was slowing. The atmosphere was doing its job, converting velocity into heat, trading speed for temperature, dragging the capsule down toward a survivable pace. The heat shield had been doing its job too, charring evenly, releasing its gases steadily, eroding layer by layer the way it was supposed to, the way the engineers had predicted it would if the new trajectory worked. And the trajectory had worked. The outer char layer had never cooled. It had never sealed. The gases had vented continuously throughout the entire descent, and the pressure pockets that had cracked apart the Artemis 1 shield had never formed. The math had been right. The orange outside the windows faded. The white center dimmed. Blue appeared at the edges, actual blue, the blue of sky, the blue of atmosphere, the blue of Earth seen from 20,000 feet while falling under gravity at a speed that was now, finally, survivable. The plasma was gone. The fire was over. The blackout was ending. And then the radio crackled. Static first. Then the familiar carrier tone of a live signal. Then a voice. Houston. Integrity. We have you loud and clear. Read Wiseman. Completely calm. Completely steady. The voice of a man who had just spent 6 minutes in silence inside a burning machine with a broken heat shield, pressing his daughters' faces into his memory against the possibility that he might never see them again, and had come out the other side and picked up the radio as if he were reporting the weather. In Houston, people who had been trained their entire careers not to show emotion in the control room showed emotion. Radigan put his head down for 1 second. 1 second of something private that he allowed himself, and then he straightened up and went back to work, because there was still a capsule to bring home and still a crew to recover. At 22,000 feet, 2 drogue parachutes shot out from the top of the capsule and snapped open with a force that punched all 4 crew members back into their seats. The capsule slowed from thousands of miles per hour down to 300 miles per hour almost instantly. Then at 6,000 feet, 3 main parachutes opened above them, each one the size of a football field, filling with air and hauling Integrity down toward the ocean at a gentle 17 miles per hour. At 8:07 in the evening, the capsule hit the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. Recovery teams from a Navy ship came alongside in inflatable boats. Divers went into the water and entered the capsule through the hatch. All 4 crew members were in good condition. One by one they climbed out, into the salt air and the evening light above the Pacific. Wiseman came last. He stepped out onto the recovery raft and he looked up. Above him was the sky that had been on fire 6 minutes ago. It was calm now. Dark blue at the edges, fading toward orange on the horizon. Ordinary. The kind of sky you see from any beach on any evening anywhere in the world. He had looked at the far side of the moon through those same windows. He had watched a solar eclipse from behind the moon. He had seen plasma turn the atmosphere into a wall of fire and watched it slowly fade back into ordinary blue sky. He had sat in silence for 6 minutes inside a capsule with a broken heat shield and come out the other side with his crewmates and his voice and the ability to pick up a radio and say, "Houston, we have you loud and clear." And somewhere on the surface of the moon above him, in the part of it that faces Earth, in the part you can see from your backyard on a clear night if you know exactly where to look, there was a small bright crater that the crew of Integrity had named Carol. A bright spot on the boundary between the side of the moon we have always known and the side we are only just beginning to reach. That felt, to everyone who was there, exactly right.